Hey, Emma, how is James feeling? He's doing okay. He seems to be calm and alright. I always worry about the elderly when they get injured. I wish he wouldn't cause us so much worry and just rest. Barbara, that's a bit. It's alright. He's old, and I'm not good at caregiving. But Emma, you're probably used to it by now, aren't you? A few days ago, James had fallen in the garden and injured his leg. Although the injury wasn't severe, given his age, he was advised to rest in bed without overexerting himself. Barbara seemed very reluctant to care for him and didn't even want to visit his room. My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old. It's been 3 years since I got married. And I live with my in-laws Barbara, Robert, and grandfather-in-law James. My husband, Michael, used to be my boss when I was working. The company I worked for was founded by James, Michael's grandfather. I joined the company 8 years ago, but by then, my father-in-law Robert was already the president, and James was the chairman. But back then, James was still actively involved in the company's core operations. Then, 2 years ago, when he turned 80, he retained his position as chairman but handed over most of his responsibilities to Robert. James, from now on, please leave the company matters to us. You should just relax and take it easy from here on out. Barbara said this with a bright smile, but to me, it seemed there was some sarcasm in her words. James might be a bit stubborn, but he's a man of his word, decisive, and loved by many. On the other hand, Robert tends to be laid back, does not express his opinions clearly, and is less dependable than James. And he always follows Barbara's lead in everything. I never got to meet my grandmother-in-law because she had already passed away by the time I joined the company. I met Michael 3 years after I started working at the company, and we worked together in the same product planning team. At that time, Michael was the team leader. He was reliable and sometimes a bit self-centered, but I saw him as someone I could rely on. I lost my father when I was a child and grew up in a single-parent household. Maybe that's why I felt a special connection to someone like Michael, who seemed so dependable. My own mother passed away from an illness 2 years ago. With her passing, my in-laws are now essentially my only family. Not long after I got married, my mother fell ill and required care. That's when I decided to quit my job and take care of her. Despite being married into the family, Michael and his family accepted my decision to care for my mother without any complaints. I believe James's words played a big part in that. Emma, your mother raised you all by herself. It's only natural for you to take care of her now. Make sure you have no regrets and give her all the care she needs. Thanks to this, I was able to spend a peaceful year with my mother, free from financial worries, until she passed away. I could only feel grateful, even if Barbara seemed a bit displeased. However, after James handed over the company's operations to Robert, the family's attitude towards him began to change. They seemed to pay less attention to what he had to say and treated him with indifference. At first, I thought it might just be my imagination. But seeing Barbara and Michael's attitudes, I started to believe it was true. It seems that Robert has a neutral attitude, but I can't shake the feeling that he's being ignored. He seemed to think that he no longer had any relation with James, who had already retired from the company. From my position as a daughter-in-law, I was upset and felt uncomfortable about the attitude of my husband's family. Hey, Michael, haven't you and your mother been acting a bit cold towards Grandpa lately? Really? I mean, even when Grandpa tries to talk to you, you barely respond, and you don't help him even when he asks for it. Stop nagging. Do you expect me to take care of an elderly person all the time? If anyone should be doing that, it should be you since you have so much free time. I'm busy with work. That's harsh. You don't have to be that mean. Don't complain. I'm exhausted from work today. Don't bother me with unnecessary stuff. Even when I tried to discuss my concerns about James, Michael wouldn't take me seriously. James didn't say anything to his family members, who treated him this way and didn't interfere much in family disputes. Recently, I'm the only one who talks to James in the family. Grandpa, the weather is nice today. How about going outside for a while? It seems your legs are getting better, and walking outside would be good exercise. Thank you, Emma. Maybe I'll give it a try. I supported him, and we went to the park together. At the park, families with children were playing happily. He was smiling as he watched them. Yes. Robert and Michael used to play like this when they were kids. Grandpa, what's wrong? I was busy with work and couldn't take much care of the kids. Maybe Robert should have spent more time playing with Michael. Watching the children at the park, James murmured to himself with a lonely expression. By the way, Robert is my father-in-law. I thought about ways for the entire family to treat James kindly, but I couldn't come up with anything. Around that time, my in-laws proposed building a new house for James. This house is over 50 years old, and its layout is old-fashioned. Don't you think? Instead of renovating it, I think it would be better to build a new house in a better location. Are you building a new house? Considering your age, James, you might get injured or sick. Thinking about that, it might be best to have a barrier-free house that is easier for caregiving. I see, that's a good idea. If we do that, we can place your room in the center, so that everyone in the family can take care of you. Yes, that might be good. Right? It's a good plan, isn't it? So, we'll proceed with that plan. Also, James, about the cost of building the house. If it's a house where everyone will live, I'll cover the costs. Discuss the financial details with Mr. Smith. Barbara smiled happily and said, "Thank you so much, James, for everything. I look forward to what's to come." Watching this interaction, I felt that Barbara seemed to be relying on James's money. Still, if moving to a new house meant that everyone in the family would cherish James and make him happy, that was what mattered most to me. Mr. Smith, the company's legal advisor, also managed James's personal assets. The relationship between them goes back over 30 years. Mr. Smith, now 58, is one of the people James trusts the most. I had met him a few times and felt he cared deeply about James's health. Feeling he was like a son to the old man. It was evident that Mr. Smith saw James as family. For James, having someone like Mr. Smith around might have been his only solace. I was not consulted much about the plans for the new house. However, from seeing how happy Barbara was discussing it with Robert and Michael, I assumed everything was going well. Then, unexpectedly, it was discovered that James had a debt of $200 million. What? 200 million? What does that mean? According to Mr. Smith, James had co-signed a loan for his friend's company. However, the company faced financial difficulties, and the debt fell on James. Wait. This won't affect our new house construction, will it? The house contract is already finalized under the chairman's name, so there's no need to worry. Hearing this, Barbara looked relieved. I'm glad. I knew I made the right decision. I realized for the first time that the new house was in Robert's name, even though James paid for it. She thought it was just like her mother-in-law to do something like this. Considering James's difficult situation, I wondered why they wouldn't consider selling the house to pay off some of the debt. So, this $200 million debt, it's James's responsibility, right? It won't affect us or the company? Well, yes. The co-signing was done under the chairman's personal name. Oh, then that's reassuring. I'm glad. What exactly was she glad about? I couldn't understand. But even during this conversation, James remained silent, so I chose not to say anything either. In reality, I couldn't do anything about such a large debt. However, a few days later, I noticed a change in James's behavior. Grandpa, it's almost lunchtime. What would you like to eat? Hey. What's with that tone? Who are you calling a grandpa? I'm only 50. I'm not old enough for you to call me that. Huh? Grandpa? Oh. Oh, Emma. I'm sorry. I was lost in thought. At first, I thought he was just distracted. However, as the same thing happened over and over again, I became more and more anxious. Barbara, what are you daydreaming about? Haven't you prepared the meal? Where's my food? Grandpa, I'm Emma. Barbara is your daughter-in-law. We finished eating a little while ago. Don't lie, I haven't eaten. You probably don't intend to feed me, do you? James's sudden change might be due to the $200 million debt. Knowing that no family member would help with it, the shock might have doubled, causing a deep emotional wound. I was confused about what to do. I tried to take him to the hospital, but he stubbornly refused. He might not want to accept the possibility that he has dementia. I don't want to force him to see a doctor, but I can't handle this alone. I consulted with Michael, but he didn't seem to care. I thought about seeking help from my mother-in-law, but honestly, she didn't seem reliable in this situation. It felt like only Robert could help. It's about Dad, isn't it? I've heard about it from Barbara and Michael. You think he might have dementia, right? I think he might. Robert, can you please convince him to go to the hospital with me? But from what I see, it doesn't seem that severe yet. If he goes to the hospital, the neighborhood will find out. And to think of him having dementia. There are now good medications for dementia that it might slow down the progression. Well, it's not so urgent now, is it? I feel safer now that you are here, and we'll see how things go a bit more. How optimistic these people are, even though the situation is getting serious. I can't keep counting on them forever. Grandpa, let's go to the hospital and get properly examined. I'll be with you. Who are you? Where do you plan on taking me? Are you plotting something against me? Even though James was originally a kind person, seeing him like this brought tears to my eyes. However, watching from a distance, Barbara just smiled and said, well, he used to be an important figure, but now he's like this. With this, Robert will inherit everything from the company. Barbara. Grandpa can still hear you, he hasn't completely lost it. Over time, he'll forget everything. He might start wandering around, not being able to control his bodily functions. Just the thought of it gives me chills. Barbara. That's terrible. How can you say such cruel things? Grandpa worked hard for this family his entire life. I was furious at Barbara's words, but I also felt deeply saddened. Yet, James just smiled quietly. Look at this old man. He probably doesn't understand anything we're saying, does he? Please stop. Barbara. While saying this, I was deeply angered by the mocking laughter of Barbara. Yet, even in such a situation, our new house would be completed soon. After moving to the new house, everyone might change their ways of thinking. I was hopeful that once we moved into the new house built by James, the in-laws would be a little grateful and might change their attitude towards him. I held on to this hope. 2 months later, our new house was finally completed. Preparing for the move was challenging, and I had been making my in-laws and Michael pack for days. Although the belongings of James and mine were still not sorted out, I couldn't make progress with my packing because my in-laws and Michael kept giving me various tasks. However, I was in no hurry, thinking that this home would remain intact, and that I could carry my small belongings later. The day of the move arrived. As we were almost done moving our belongings, I was about to call James when Michael unexpectedly spoke out. Hey, Emma, you and Grandpa can stay here. What? What do you mean? You will continue living in this house. In other words, we don't need unnecessary items in the new house. To put it bluntly, you and Grandpa will continue to live here. As for Grandpa's debt, we don't want it, so we'll leave it to you. That's right. Even you can at least become a housekeeper, I suppose. Barbara and Michael, let's go. Yes, I'm coming over now. So, please take care of the old man and repay the debt. Leaving these words behind, my in-laws confidently got into the car and left. I stood there, stunned, unable to comprehend the sudden turn of events. I had been left behind. And not just me, James had been left behind in this house as well. They apparently planned to live in the new house by themselves. Such an outrageous act was beyond my imagination. And it took me some time to grasp the situation. I was struggling with how to explain the situation to James. With a heavy heart and sadness, I went back to the room where he was. I had initially intended to take care of James, so there was no issue there. However, I was really troubled about how to explain it in a way he would understand. In the room, he sat with his back to me. As I hesitated on how to explain, sensing my presence, he slowly turned to face me. Well, have they already left? The look on his face was drastically different from the usual distant and vague expression he had. He seemed like an entirely different person. Huh? Grandpa, what's going on? I panicked, thinking he might be showing signs different from his dementia. At that moment, James had a smile on his face. I was very surprised by what James said next. As I was talking to James, trying to understand, Mr. Smith came over and said, "Mr. Chairman, thank you for your hard work. Did the big cleaning go smoothly?" Mr. Smith. "Everything's fine, it's all done. Now, shall we go?" "Wait. Grandpa, where are you saying we're going?" "Of course, to our new home." I was completely bewildered and confused. I was then taken by James and left our former house. The next month, I received persistent calls, several times a day, from Barbara and Michael. James said I didn't need to entertain that family. But since I've decided to divorce Michael, I answered his calls. "Hey, Emma. Is Grandpa with you? I went to our old house and it was on sale. That house isn't worth $200 million. Why did you do this when you can't repay your debts? What are you talking about? What happened? Just put Grandpa on. Dad's saying he can't contact him. That old man did it without consulting us." Listening to Michael's raised voice, I pretended not to know the situation. Though I had a good idea and listened to his story. Grandpa sold his company shares to the executive director. As a result, after holding a shareholders meeting and board meeting, my father was dismissed as the CEO. Really? But the executive director has charisma, right? I think if Grandpa were to hand over the company, he'd want someone reputable. That's got to be a lie. The executive director must have deceived Grandpa and manipulated him into selling his shares. That's invalid. Michael, I think you're misunderstanding. Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he's clearer now than before. What? He's not senile? Until the day of that move, I truly believed that James had developed dementia. However, it seems that since the moment Barbara proposed building a new house and living together, he doubted her intentions. He then had an idea. James pretended to have dementia to gauge the true intentions of the in-laws and Michael. As expected, they revealed their true nature and eventually left James and me. It was just as I expected. It was really hard to hold back my laughter, James said with a chuckle. I felt relieved and surprised. Although I had mixed feelings about deceiving the in-laws and Michael, James's plan was successful. They say to deceive your enemies, first deceive your allies. James smiled. It seems James had been receiving detailed reports about The company from the executive director and Mr. Smith. According to them, since James's departure, both Robert and Michael had been acting selfishly, wasting company expenses. James had handed the company over to his son, Robert, but felt uncertain about its future. So, he decided to take this drastic measure and entrust it to the executive director. Hey, how did you settle the $200 million debt? That's already been fully paid off, so it doesn't exist anymore. It's true that James had co-signed a loan for an acquaintance. However, he had personal assets that exceeded that amount. After leaving his company, James made significant profits from real estate investment. But if Barbara and Michael knew this, they'd easily imagine targeting those assets. So, he only informed them about the $200 million debt. By the way, this acquaintance was the son of someone who helped Robert in many ways when he was young. This son owned land in a rural area that was recently sold for a high price due to resort development. As a result, the $200 million debt was successfully repaid. What? Seriously? Grandpa had that much money? More importantly, how are your parents now? Are they okay? Of course, they're not okay. Both my father and I had to leave our jobs. How are we supposed to live now? Yeah, you still have that house loan too. What? What are you talking about? House loan? There's a loan? What? Don't you realize? About the house loan. What? But Grandpa was supposed to have paid everything, right? Oh? Don't you remember? What did Grandpa say back then? When Barbara talked to James about the finances for building the house. He had mentioned, if it's a house where everyone, including me, will live. In other words, he wouldn't give any money if he wasn't living with them. Even if the new house was under Robert's name, if it was for everyone in the family. James intended to cover the construction costs, as he said. You and others misunderstood only the part where Grandpa said he'd pay. You didn't check the paperwork properly. Even your father signed without checking. Maybe that's why he was never fit to be a company president in the first place. What? Seriously? As it turns out, the in-laws, after indulging in luxury, couldn't afford the house loan and ended up having to let it go. They moved to an over 50-year-old apartment and struggled with the remaining loan, living in extreme poverty. In the meantime, both the mother-in-law and Michael persistently suggested living together. But after everything, it's unimaginable. After stepping down from his chairman position, James bought an old country house. And now, I live with him. Emma, you don't have to be tied down here. Don't worry about living expenses, you can live anywhere you like, James tells me. But I chose to live with James. I'm fine. If I'm not a bother, can I stay with you? When I said this, it seemed he was touched, his eyes tearing up. Thanks to Mr. Smith, my divorce went smoothly. Robert and Michael, my ex-husband, were disowned. And I proceeded to become the adopted daughter of James. I'm truly grateful to James who became my father. If anything happens to James, I intend to take care of him until the very end. Now, living just the two of us, we enjoy working in the fields together. Wow. Dad. Look at this radish. It's so big. Oh. Just like your leg, Emma. A splendid radish indeed. What? Come on. Dad, what are you saying? Under the soft and bright sunshine, our days are peaceful and serene. I hope these wonderful days continue even for a day longer, and I laugh with that wish in my heart.